Hello. Looking back on the last couple of years, it does appear to me that the 12 months prior to the COVID scamdemic, so March 2019 to March 2020, the public were being primed for this massive psychological operation through the way the climate change hoax was really being ramped up. That climate change was now an emergency, the climate emergency, and Theresa May had committed Britain to net zero carbon emissions by 2050, which, if you think about it, is absolutely preposterous because we're breathing out carbon dioxide every day. So incredibly sinister. And of course, the rise of Extinction Rebellion saying, well, no, this needs to be 2025, and Greta Thunberg. And it was getting really, really nasty and ugly. And people who were skeptical of this, who were being called deniers. There was no opposition on the BBC. Previously, there was a little bit of opposition, a few dissenting voices, but there just seemed to be none at all. It was just about how fast do we go down this, do we push this green agenda? Incredibly sinister stuff. And what I find is extraordinary is that in 2019, we called it the climate emergency. It was declared as an emergency. We've got to act now. And yet, 2020, this emergency has largely been forgotten about because it's been overshadowed by COVID. And that's a funny kind of emergency if you can forget about it for a whole year. It's a bit of a funny kind of emergency, in my opinion. But what I've noticed, and this really is something that's been the case as long as I can remember, is that our media is presenting us with crisis after crisis. Not necessarily in this country, but somewhere in the world there's a crisis. And the crises never seem to get resolved or come to any kind of end, but it's just replaced by another, replaced and overshadowed by another crisis. You may, in years gone by, have heard about news about wars in the Middle East, and rather than hearing about how that war has ended, if it ever did end, it just kind of fizzles out, and the news starts talking about some other event, some other crisis, and it's just one crisis after another, and the crises are really intensifying. I think they have in the last couple of years, and when it comes to COVID, what I think is quite likely to happen this year, and is that, yes, the restrictions will be eased somewhat in the spring. I think the wheels will fall off the COVID scamdemic. It won't be possible for the public to to convince the public there's this deadly virus out there. I think this is happening already. If you look at the number of people out there at the protest regarding the Sarah Everard vigil being banned in London today, you can see, although these people were virtue signalling and wearing masks mostly, they obviously didn't believe there was a deadly pandemic, because if they really did, they would be staying at home. But the point is that whilst the wheels might gradually fall off the COVID scamdemic, I cannot see, unfortunately, I think it would seem very uncharacteristic about the way things have been for there to be some great celebration and a declaration that this crisis is over and we can go back to normal, because it is all part of the globalist agenda. I think what's more likely to happen is that businesses will reopen, but they'll have to do it in some sort of perpetual COVID secure way, which means that a lot of businesses will end up going bankrupt because they're not able to profit that way. So we'll be living in a perpetual COVID secure environments. There'll always be this climate of contagion fear, just like there is this underlying issue still of there being a climate emergency, although I don't think it's particularly concerning to your average member of the general public, but it will be there, the contagion fear. But what's more likely to happen is that other new crises will emerge and overshadow the COVID supposed crisis. And these other new crises that emerge will be used to justify more restrictions and more sacrifices and all that sort of thing. I wouldn't be that surprised if the murder of Sarah Everard is exploited to create some sort of crisis of some sort. or some sort of social engineering. That seems to be happening, I think. And this is very concerning because if we look at the way things have been, we never get out of crisis. Crisis never seem to come to an end. I always thought it was interesting with the whole climate issue. If you ever ask a member of Extinction Rebellion, okay, what needs to happen in terms of how do you need to see our climate being regulated for you to be satisfied that the climate emergency is over? If you ever ask them a question like that, they don't have any answer because it's obvious they're not going to be satisfied because their real agenda is not about controlling the climate. Their real agenda is their Marxism and the globalism. And of course, a lot of people in these movements are just the useful idiots that are being used to push this. But there is no criteria. They're never going to say, I'm happy the climate is regulated sufficiently now and the climate is over, because there's no problem with the climate at all. I mean, all of us, we go out on an average day, and the vast majority of the time there's nothing unusual about the weather. Of course, you're going to get hot days, cold days, all kinds of weather. You get the normal variations, but the vast majority of the time we are in the normal weather variations we have for the time of year. So no one alive can actually say, because of their experience, that they are worried about the climate, because our climate remains very temperate. But the point is, it is not enough just to merely expose the COVID con, to expose the false stats, the false computer modelling, the fraud and medical malpractice. It's not enough to merely expose the climate con, and they're two twins really. They both rely on the same sort of thing: faulty computer modelling, fake stats and graphs, labelling of dissenters as deniers without any evidence, all that sort of thing. But what we need to do is we need to show the public that we need to get the public to recognise that whenever the politicians come out and announce that we have a crisis, and it doesn't matter whether it's a virus, it doesn't matter whether it's the climate, whether it's knife crime, whether it's obesity, and even if it is a crisis based on something which is a problem for some people, such as obesity, which is a genuine problem for certain people, whenever the politicians go on stage and say, we're in a crisis and we've all got to do our bit, we're all in it together, we've all got to play our part, we've all got to make some sort of sacrifice, we've all got to abide by some sort of restriction to end this crisis, then we can be sure, and the public need to know that we can be sure that this is not a genuine crisis, this is simply a psychological operation to control the population, to distract them away from the real issues, to push in the agendas of the globalist elite. And the public need to get smart and be aware of that. And they need to learn to smell that kind of crisis. They need to learn to smell that kind of psychological operation. I could smell that COVID was a con. I can smell that the climate crisis was a con. The public need to learn to see the pattern there. Always something invisible, not an obvious thing, but something that we have to be told is a crisis. And it applies even if it is something that is a genuine concern to some people, such as obesity or such as knife crime or whatever. Whenever we're being told we're all in it together, we've all got to do our bit, we've all got to play our part, we've all got to sacrifice this, that and the other, even though for many of us it's not a problem, we know it's a psychological operation and we need to push back against that sort of thing. Thank you.